A single spark, a flash of fire, a sound that changed the world. For most of human history, war was fought with muscle, swords, spears, arrows, and stone walls that could hold back an army for months. Then, somewhere in a quiet corner of medieval China, a group of people looking for something else entirely stumbled onto a discovery that would reshape empires, topple castles, and redraw the map of global power. That discovery was gunpowder. Today, we're tracing the story of this remarkable substance, where it came from, how it was made, and why a simple black powder became one of the most consequential inventions in human history. Our story doesn't begin on a battlefield. It begins with a search for immortality. Around 1,000 years ago, during China's Tang Dynasty, court alchemists were hard at work on one of humanity's oldest obsessions, finding a formula for eternal life. They experimented endlessly with minerals, metals, and natural compounds, hoping to brew an elixir that could cheat death itself. Instead, they created something that could end life in an instant. By mixing a handful of natural substances, these early chemists produced a powder that would ignite violently when exposed to flame. Rather than a potion of immortality, they had invented one of the most powerful weapons in human history, though at first, nobody quite realized what they were holding. For a while, gunpowder's main claim to fame wasn't warfare, it was celebration. The Chinese used it in early fireworks, in signal flares, and in rudimentary rockets used for ceremonies and to frighten enemies rather than destroy them. But history rarely lets a powerful discovery stay purely decorative for long. As centuries passed, word and knowledge of this explosive mixture began to travel. Merchants, travelers, and soldiers carried it along the great trading networks connecting Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. Each culture that encountered gunpowder began experimenting with its own applications. Engineers in the Middle East refined early explosive devices. European blacksmiths and metalworkers, always looking for a battlefield advantage, saw the potential for something far more destructive than a firework. By the closing years of the medieval period, gunpowder had stopped being a curiosity and had become a weapon of state. The first crude cannons appeared heavy, unreliable, and often more dangerous to their operators than their targets. But they worked. And once armies realized that a wall built to withstand a siege of years could be breached in an afternoon, there was no turning back. Castles that had stood for generations, seemingly impenetrable, suddenly became vulnerable. Armored knights, once the unstoppable force of the battlefield, found themselves facing a weapon that didn't care about a suit of plate armor. The entire logic of warfare was about to be rewritten. So what exactly is this stuff? At its core, gunpowder, sometimes called black powder, is a combination of 3 natural ingredients, each with its own job to do. The first is a nitrate-rich mineral compound, historically harvested from mineral deposits or extracted from decomposing organic waste. This component supplies the oxygen needed to sustain a rapid burn. Without it, the mixture wouldn't combust nearly as violently. The second ingredient is charcoal, produced by slow-burning wood with very little oxygen present. This gives the mixture its fuel, the material that actually burns. The third is a pale yellow mineral, often sourced near volcanic regions, which helps the mixture ignite more easily and burn with greater intensity. Individually, none of these 3 materials is especially dangerous, but combine them in the right proportions, and you get a substance capable of shattering stone. Getting that proportion right was no small feat. Quick pause. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. We upload fascinating science behind everyday things every week. Now let's get back to the story. Early gunpowder makers experimented for centuries, refining their mixtures through trial, error, and occasionally tragedy. Over time, craftsmen across different regions arrived at broadly similar recipes, discovering that a mixture weighted heavily toward the nitrate compound, with smaller amounts of charcoal and the mineral additive, produced the most reliable and powerful results. Turning these 3 raw ingredients into usable gunpowder wasn't as simple as tossing them together. Historical powder makers treated it as a genuine craft, passed down through generations of specialized workers. Each ingredient first had to be broken down into an extremely fine powder. The finer the grind, the more evenly the materials could react together. Craftsmen used heavy grinding stones, mills, and mortars to painstakingly reduce each component before combining them. The blending process itself was treated with real caution. Because dry powder was prone to sparking from friction alone, many powder makers dampened the mixture slightly during blending, a technique that reduced the risk of a workshop suddenly becoming a crater. Once properly combined, the mixture was dried and then broken into small, consistent grains, a process that mattered more than it might seem. Powder ground into fine grains burned fast and hot, ideal for certain firearms, while coarser grains burned more slowly, useful for artillery and other applications where a slower, sustained burn was preferred. This attention to grain size represented a genuine technological leap. Inconsistent gunpowder was unpredictable and often unreliable in combat. As producers learned to control grain size and consistency, gunpowder became a far more dependable and lethal tool of war. Working with gunpowder was never without risk. Powder mills throughout history were notoriously hazardous places to work, and a single stray spark or unexpected static charge could level an entire facility in seconds. Because of this, gunpowder production and storage were subject to strict rules almost everywhere it was made. Powder was typically kept in sealed, moisture-proof containers, stored far from open flame, and often housed in dedicated buildings set apart from the rest of a settlement. Precisely so that if disaster struck, it wouldn't take the whole town with it. These precautions weren't just bureaucratic caution. Countless accidental explosions throughout history, some destroying entire arsenals, served as brutal reminders of just how unforgiving this material could be. It's genuinely hard to overstate how much gunpowder changed the course of human history. On the battlefield, it ended the age of the armored knight and the impregnable fortress. Warfare shifted from close combat and siege tactics toward firearms, artillery, and eventually the industrialized combat of later centuries. Nations that mastered gunpowder production and firearm technology gained enormous advantages over those that didn't, reshaping the balance of global power for centuries to come. But gunpowder's legacy reaches well beyond the battlefield. Miners used it to blast through rock in search of precious ore. Engineers used it to clear land and carve tunnels through mountains that would otherwise have taken lifetimes to excavate by hand. And, in perhaps its most joyful modern form, it still lights up night skies around the world every time a firework explodes in a burst of color. Even as newer, more powerful explosives eventually emerged, gunpowder never really disappeared. It remained the propellant of choice in small arms and antique firearms long after chemists developed smokeless alternatives. And it's still manufactured today for historical reenactments, black powder hunting rifles, and traditional pyrotechnics. There's something fitting about that longevity. Gunpowder wasn't just a stepping stone toward more advanced weapons. It was, and in many ways still is, a technology in its own right. One that hobbyists, historians, and artisans continue to study and use centuries after it first appeared. Its story also shows us something bigger about innovation itself, that breakthroughs rarely arrive exactly where we expect them. Alchemists searching for eternal life instead handed the world a force capable of reshaping continents. That's a pattern that repeats throughout history. Discovery is often a byproduct of curiosity, not the goal of it. What began as a failed search for eternal life became one of the most transformative inventions humanity has ever produced. It's a reminder that some of history's most powerful discoveries come not from a plan, but from an accident, one small mixture of minerals, and a spark that changed everything. Thanks for watching this episode. If there's a topic you'd love us to cover next, drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories hidden inside the everyday.